What's good? What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Urban Platform Speaks. Make sure to like and subscribe as you tune into the channel, check out the content. And with that being said, man, I want to talk about a comment that was made by one of Michael Jordan's teammates, right? Michael Jordan played for a few years with a guy by the name of Craig Hodges. Craig Hodges was a really good three-point shooter. When he played on the Chicago Bulls. I know he won. He was there for at least one of their championships. Maybe a couple of their championships. Craig Hodges was there, and Craig Hodges was pretty close to Michael Jordan, right? And so Craig Hodges talked about how Michael Jordan said that Clyde Drexler was just as good as him, but the only difference between Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler was that Clyde Drexler wasn't as marketable as Michael Jordan. So this came from this statement actually came from Michael Jordan. And even in that documentary, The Last Dance, I watched that and Michael Jordan said it on there that Clyde Drexler was just as good, but he wasn't as marketable. Um, he didn't play the game, meaning like he didn't play the game the way Mike did, as far as like the marketing part of it. Mike was, you know, Mike was more into the marketing than Clyde Drexler was, but he said that Clyde was just as good as him. Excuse me, Clyde Drexler. I've been watching Clyde Drexler since he was in college with the Five Slammer Jammer, Hakeem Olajuwon, Larry Mishaw, Clyde Drexler. Man, they had with the Houston Cougars. I'm sorry, I don't know if I said the Rockets or not, but the Houston Cougars when they was in college, man, they had a tough. Their team, Five Slammer Jammer, was tough, and they had some other guys on that team too. I just can't recall their name, but they had some other guys on that who was monsters too. I mean, that team just was loaded. And to me, they look like an NBA team. That's just how much talent they had on that one team. Like I said, you had in college, you had Hakeem Olajuwon playing with Clyde Drexler and Larry Mishaw. Larry Mishaw wasn't no bum either. If they even if they didn't have Hakeem Olajuwon, they just had Larry Mishaw, they still would have been big time. It's just that lineup just was crazy. And Clyde, even in that lineup, Clyde still stood out. You know what I mean? Like the one hand gliding dunks and stuff like that. Clyde was a beast in college. And then I don't know. Let me see. What year did Clyde get drafted? I think he got drafted like a year before Michael Jordan. Let me see here. Let me see. All right. Clyde Drexler. Let me see. Let me see. Clyde Drexler. When did he Clyde Drexler? Michael Jordan. I'm trying to think. I know he got Clyde Drexler got drafted by the Portland Trail Blazers in 1983. And so I remember. And then Clyde Drexler, 6'7" shooting guard. He went number 14 to the Portland Trail Blazers. And during his career, he averaged 20 points, 5 assists, and 6 rebounds. You know what I mean? Those some very good numbers. And I remember like watching in the pros, watching Mike and Clyde go at each other. And Clyde gave Mike, man, he gave Mike everything Mike could want at both ends. When Mike had the ball, I remember seeing him like blocking Mike's shots a couple times. Even when they played each other in the Chicago beat Portland in a championship, but Clyde at times though, Clyde just, like I said, he gave Mike everything Mike could handle. And Mike, Mike being Mike, accepted the challenge, and Mike just took his game to an even higher level. But Clyde was, he was that dude. So you can't be surprised that Mike would feel like Clyde was, was that dude. Now, Mike said that Clyde was as good as him, but even just looking at like from the eye test, it was you could just see that it was nothing else that Mike had that took him to another level, And so I think Mike probably just being a little bit humble, but Clyde was that dude, and I like to watch Clyde play. Clyde was, like 6'7", athletic, um, and could do everything. Except, you know what? Now, Mike didn't have any flaws in this game. But one of Clyde, he had a flaw in his game, and Clyde couldn't go left. Everything was to the right. He did not have a left hand. He couldn't shoot with his left hand. He couldn't go off of like his opposite foot. So Clyde had some holes in his game. Then also Clyde he wasn't a great ball handler. So Clyde had some holes whereas though Mike didn't have those holes in his game. Um, Clyde mid-range game wasn't like Mike's. So when Mike made that statement, Mike have a lot of respect for Clyde, and a lot of people, compare their games because Clyde he was a high flyer just like Mike. But looking at Mike and then looking at Clyde game, after a while you'll see, you be like, oh, okay, I see what the difference is. Mike was you know, man, Mike just was that dude. Mike just was that dude. But Clyde couldn't go left. He didn't have a mid range. You know what I mean? He ain't had that turnaround jumper like what Mike had. But don't get me wrong, Clyde could shoot. But Mike turnaround jumper was just like automatic. It was almost to the point. Mike turnaround jumper was as good as Kareem's sky hook. It was just that dangerous. It was a shot that like nobody really could stop that shot. And Clyde didn't have that, and so I thought it was high praise though, a praise like that coming from Michael Jordan to talk about Clyde Drexler like that, because a lot of times Clyde Drexler, he was, in my opinion, he was very underrated as a ball player. And that's probably because of Michael Jordan. You had Michael Jordan in the league, and so everything Mike did was graceful and spectacular. So people kind of overlooked Clyde Drexler. And yeah, Clyde was that dude. Like I said, I've been following Clyde since college. And so, whatever Clyde wanted to do against the teammates and stuff. And Clyde, in my opinion, his game was more suited for an up and down. He was more like a slasher, like a up and down a court, running gun style, because that's what they did in Houston. And even his early years in Portland, they used to get up and down the court. You know what I mean? He'll fill a lane, and then they'll get him the basketball, and then he'll dunk on people. He'll dunk the ball. But if you watch the games back then, you could see a difference between Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler. And so, man, I just think when Mike gave Clyde that compliment, thought it was cool, but I also thought Mike was he was being a little bit, he was just being nice, man. He just being nice because, on the one hand, Clyde was underrated, but on the other hand, he still wasn't Mike though. He still wasn't Mike. Mike, even when Mike just was so much, and Clyde glide, and he had a pretty game, but he still wasn't Mike. And if you didn't get to see those two guys play at the same time, then you probably, like Mike just was on a different level. Even watching somebody like Dr. J, like Julius Erving. And Julius Erving was a high flyer too, right? And Julius Erving was another guy who didn't have a left hand. He didn't have a mid-range game. Julius, he had holes in his game. And so that's what separated Mike from those guys. Mike didn't have no holes in his game. So you couldn't say, um, I'm gonna defend Mike this way, or I'm gonna make Mike do this or make Mike do that, because Mike could do everything. He did everything. He was good at everything as far as like going left, going right, um, mid-range game, footwork. Uh Man, he was a slasher when early in his years, he was a slasher. Then he developed the low post game, whereas though those guys, didn't have that, and Mike did. And so when Mike gave Clyde that I think Mike was just being like a little bit generous, and humble, and which I think is good, and yeah, I heard Mike say that, during the like I said, during the Last Dance, then that documentary. I heard Mike say that, but I, I mean, to have Clyde, I think Clyde would have been just like if you took Michael Jordan out of the league and you just had Clyde in the league, Clyde would have been to the league what Dr. J was during his heyday, you know, and even during Dr. J's heyday, Dr. J didn't take the league to where Michael Jordan took it. So the league still would have been missing something. And that something was Michael Jordan. It was just different. Clyde probably would have been like like a modern day Michael Jordan. I mean, a modern day Julius Erving, Dr. J. And their game's almost the same. Clyde was a little bit better than Dr. J at some things. He was a little bit better than Dr. J, but he wasn't Michael Jordan. So yeah, man, I just thought that was cool, for Mike to say that. And yeah, so that's my take on it. With that being said, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a comment. And with that being said, I'll check y'all out in the next video. Peace.